As many members of the Starscape community probably know, Starscape and its factions are dying. It went from over 1,000 active players in 2020, but now it's down to below 500 active players at peak times in 2021. So, what happened? There are probably plenty of reasons it could be dying. Still, I will be going over what I and many others believe are the four most important factors: NPC faction warfare and its mechanics, the insurance system, the complete lack of intrinsic PvP incentives, and the exceedingly large skill gap. I'll go over the insurance factor first. Contrary to what the dev team told the community, the insurance system actually plays a good role in the death of factions. Before the insurance update, killing an enemy destroyer meant setting the enemy back quite a bit. Losing a destroyer was a heavy loss. One could say that the insurance system was a good idea because it'll encourage PvP and the employment of expensive ships in battle. While yes, it can promote the utilization of larger StarCraft, it comes at a cost. Nowadays, the only type of ship seen in engagements is destroyers. However, it's not even a big deal whenever one is destroyed. Insurance removed the intrinsic value or incentive of PvP. Intrinsic value is just the emotional or abstract value, in this case, the euphoria one gets when destroying an expensive enemy ship. What drove faction PvP was the loss incentive. Every time a ship is destroyed, it sets the faction back. Their resources are being taken away. They're being hurt by a destroyer loss. Now, a destroyer loss means almost nothing to the more prominent factions or coalitions, especially now that ships aren't lost on death. Keep in mind, most faction PvP is started by the major clans or alliances. Even if insurance is off in wild space, most PvP still happens in unsecure or contested. A reason PvP was so fun before was because of the adrenaline rush one can get from the potential of losing an expensive ship. Now with insurance, this is also gone. Even before the insurance update, many factions were still willing to risk destroyers because they had the training, skill, and money to use them. The only factions that didn't use such large ships were the smaller or growing groups that didn't have all those resources available. The benefits of using destroyers also outweighed the cons, as it can give factions a substantial upper hand in battle. Furthermore, the people who generally start up factions and can successfully run one are the hardcore players. Since more forgiving game mechanics usually only appeal to a younger or casual audience, the hardcore player base will basically be pushed away from the game. With this, not only is insurance killing off factions through eliminating the loss incentive, but the source of factions is also gone. Next up, NPC faction warfare and its mechanics. In short, it is excruciatingly monotonous and repetitive. To elaborate, before NPC faction warfare was released, most combat was concentrated in two systems: Gadansir and Aralet. Those systems are only 2 to 5 warps away from the Citadel. After NPC faction warfare got released, all the PvP and action was basically taken away from those systems and moved to probably hundreds of contested systems on the map. This did two things: made finding people to fight considerably more challenging, especially when just trying to find a 1v1, and getting to any battle extremely hard. Before, people could just hop on over to one of those two systems and there would be an extremely high chance they'll find someone to fight. Now, they need to go through dozens of systems before finding anyone to engage. Even with the combat markers on contested systems, often, those systems are so far away that by the time they get to it, the enemies have probably left. Either that or the markers are simply outdated and don't even provide correct information. This is further amplified by the fact that the NPC faction fronts are at least 15 jumps away from each other. Now let's say someone did manage to find a group of people to fight. If they were just scouting the contested systems on their own, they would now need to call in reinforcements from their faction to even stand a chance. Considering how far away contested systems are from the Citadel, it'll take at least 10 to 20 minutes to rally people. By then, the enemy group will probably have left. One could say that there are clone bays in NPC faction capitals, which balances things out. It doesn't. Most people don't want to set their spawn locations to a faction capital because they would be losing access to the only active player market in the game. It would also make it harder for them to get to specific locations on the other side of the map. Furthermore, the system cooldown timers contributed even more to how boring NPC faction warfare was. When someone captures a system, there's a 6-hour timer before anyone can take any other systems adjacent to it in that system itself. Before, people could warp on over to a PvP hotspot any time of the day and find someone to fight. With the timer mechanics, PvP is basically locked to specific times in the day. This is horrible for the activity of the game. All of these factors combined made PvP more like a waiting game than an actual tense battle. But there's more. Warp disruption is disabled in contested systems, which made PvP extraordinarily annoying and frustrating. And I'm saying this from experience. Many times, an enemy would warp out just before they were killed. The only way to counter this is to have overwhelming numbers over the enemy group or be highly skilled in the game. While the point of NPC faction warfare might be to capture systems instead of getting kills, kills are really the only thing driving players to keep coming back for more. As I explained in the entrance section, kills give players euphoria. However, capturing systems doesn't, and probably will never be able to deliver players the same emotional high as destroying ships. Disabling warp disruption also led to the creation of an exceedingly annoying and overpowered defensive meta. To use this meta, a group of people would have to position their ships where they are aligned to another system or planet and point their turrets towards the warp-in point. After the setup is complete, they just have to wait for enemies to warp in. Then, they would all focus one ship until they are low on health or have killed an enemy ship and immediately warp out. The reason this meta works so well is due to the fact the attackers are usually not aligned towards a planet or system where they can quickly get out when low on health. This meta takes advantage of the time it takes to align and warp out to kill a ship. It makes trying any offensive move a stupid decision without overwhelming numbers or an extremely skilled fleet. Naturally, defenders already have an advantage in battle. Now with warp disruption disabled and this meta in full use, the defenders have even more of an unfair advantage. The only other way of overcoming this strategy other than having overwhelming numbers is by baiting the defenders to exit their position. However, the defenders probably won't get tricked if they are competent enough. This basically translates to two factions in different systems waiting for the other one to make a move which they most likely won't. While a fleet could just capture the enemy's other systems to attempt to get them to make a move, there isn't really any reason to defend orange dots on a map. They could just let them get taken and there would be no consequences to that decision. It just made an undefeatable and extremely annoying meta that made battles a numbers game. Re-enabling warp disruption also isn't the only way to fix the problems disabling it created. Now let's say a faction did decide to make a move and attack with overwhelming numbers. The defending fleet would most likely stay inside this secure bubble around HQ since it gives the defenders more time to think, allows them to warp out safely, and generally just gives them an advantage. Once the defending faction realizes how outnumbered they are, they will just warp out because they know their chances of winning that fight are near zero. This, in turn, creates a gameplay loop of waiting and warping out. Then, what about the significant battles that did happen? The only reason those happened was because of human error. In a perfect world where human error is non-existent, this gameplay loop I just described would be entirely true in all cases. A reason PvP was so fun before was because of the uncertainty. Uncertainty makes games fun because it gives players a sense of power to change the outcome of a battle and makes them feel every decision matters. When opposing fleets have the same number and skill, that is when uncertainty is at its highest. With all the advantages the defending fleet has, this uncertainty is basically destroyed. Without uncertainty, battles are fought before they even start, and they usually don't even start at all. Against all odds, let's say two factions meet in the HQ and start fighting. The fight would most likely be at a stronghold, garrison, or any type of fortified HQ as they are generally more important to defend. Not only do the defenders already have a massive advantage, but they also get even more of an advantage by how much damage the HQ and surrounding NPCs do. This then amplifies even more the fact one would need overwhelming numbers to even have a chance. This further makes going on the offensive even more of a stupid decision, making PvP even more of a waiting game. Of course, there are many easy counters to this, but using a strategy to counter this is like putting duct tape on a leaking pipe. The defenders still get an underlying advantage. Factor in everything, and all that's left of NPC faction warfare is the PvE. Don't get me started on how boring and grindy this was. It's always the same shoot generators and shoot HQ beacon repeated over and over again. Even drone hunting had more variation and was less of a grind than capturing systems. At least in drone hunting, there are many different types of drone structures and fleets, and occasionally, a battleship would spawn, which was always quite fun to defeat. There's a complete lack of intrinsic incentives, which I will go over in depth next, to keep capturing systems, leading to the burnout of players. Combine all these factors, and most PvP just becomes either waiting or a dull grind. Without PvP content, factions cannot survive. Next, the complete lack of intrinsic PvP incentives. Other than the loss incentive, there really aren't any intrinsic rewards. I already explained what an intrinsic incentive is in the insurance section, but I'll explain it again. They are the emotional or abstract motivations like the satisfaction of creating a new ship. The opposite is extrinsic incentives, which are material motivations like gaining loot from a drone wreck. Simply adding more extrinsic incentives, like earning credits after killing someone, won't fix anything. There needs to be a balance of extrinsic and intrinsic incentives. An example of this could be scarce, non-interchangeable structures that factions can capture and generate value. By no means is this the best example, but I'll still go with it. When a fleet captures one of these structures, they limit other factions from gaining the value only available at these facilities. This example balances extrinsic and intrinsic incentives because the structures generate value, which is an extrinsic motivation. Factions can also limit other groups from the value produced by the facilities by capturing one of them, which is an intrinsic incentive since it's more abstract. The lack of good intrinsic PvP incentives just makes PvP grindy and unfulfilling. There isn't much of a reason to fight without any good intrinsic PvP rewards. Finally, the exceedingly large skill gap between old and new factions. A reason the game was so successful back then was that everyone was predominantly on the same skill level. This allowed for much more engaging battles and skirmishes as things were more uncertain. The skill gap is basically keeping newer factions at the bottom of the skill spectrum while keeping older coalitions at the top. It'll also only worsen as the game gets older. See, every death a developing faction sustains sets them back a lot more than older factions, which means they learn slower. The best way to get good at PvP is to actually participate in it. However, if they can't even participate in it due to losing a large ship in a previous battle, they not only learn a lot slower, but also get demoralized. It'll seem impossible for them to get good at the game. As I explained in the insurance section, simply adding insurance will be more damaging than helpful. Adding a more in-depth combat tutorial will also be detrimental. Why? It's because adding a highly in-depth and up-to-date combat tutorial is convenient for the players. Now, why is convenience harmful to the game? Shouldn't it be the opposite? Well, convenience destroys the adventure and discovery of reaching the end goal. In this case, an extremely up-to-date combat tutorial eliminates the entire discovery process of getting good at PvP. For example, if new players were given all the resources they would ever need at the start of the game, building a large ship like a destroyer wouldn't be an achievement at all. They wouldn't have any emotional connection with the destroyer they just made. Being good at PvP should be an achievement. As many say, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Just imagine an underdog faction beating up an established coalition making the headlines. Creating an up-to-date combat tutorial will also require asking the older groups for information, which will be a pain in the butt. Another solution to this could be to add a sandbox game mode where one can practice PvP easily. Once again, this is also convenient. Solving this dilemma won't be easy. It'll require lots of creative thinking. Many modern MMOs focused on PvP haven't solved this yet. However, if this does get solved, and all the other problems I described also get solved, I guarantee Starscape will not only blow up in popularity, but will also be a new leap in MMO game mechanics. Now here's a message to Keth and the Starscape dev team. Is this really what you want the game to be? For Starscape just to be your average grinding game? For Starscape just to be your average tycoon game? The thing that separates this game from any other game on Roblox is the factions, PvP, and the 100-player battles. You can add as many solo content updates as you want, but it'll just die out within a month or two. Solo content updates will never beat the success and longevity of faction content, and therefore faction content should be the first priority. MMOs aren't meant to be played solo, nor are they designed for solo gameplay. Take away the multiplayer, and there's nothing to separate this game from something like Cookie Clicker. In almost any MMO out there, it's always the relationships people form that gives the game their magic. Without factions or PvP, Starscape is just an empty shell, a game without any purpose. Starscape shouldn't be your average tycoon game. It should be epic 100-player battles. It should be a tense political landscape. It should be betrayals and allying of new factions. It should be this.